All right, let's move on now. December the 10th every year is set aside by the United Nations as the International Human Rights Day. It commemorates the day the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. This year marks the 72nd anniversary of the UDHR, that's the human rights. Now, TVC News, Celestina Era reports. Joining us now, let's get to that report before we discuss this in the studio.
The Human Rights Day is celebrated annually across the world to mark the first global enunciation of human rights, one of the first achievements of the new United Nations. In 1979, Nigeria moved to a presidential system in order to properly institute the rights of citizens to choose who rules them and craft a new constitution. The 1999 Constitution enables Nigeria to translate international agreements into domestic laws and oblige all branches of government to respect and ensure the rights are implemented in their regions. The fundamental human rights varies: right to life, right to dignity, right to freedom from torture, right to freedom of expression, right to freedom of association, right to freedom of movement, right to seek redress in court for violations of rights. Despite being provided for in the Constitution, the violation of human rights has been on the increase in recent times. Citizens are denied their right to peaceful protest through unlawful bans, use of excessive force, illegal detentions, harassment and arbitrary arrest. Security agencies use tear gas, water cannons, and sometimes force to disperse the protesters. On 19th October, the EndSARS protests in Lagos took a new twist at the Lekki toll gates. Men dressed in Nigerian military uniforms allegedly opened fire on protesters. These left many injured and some deaths recorded. This incident had gained international attention, with international communities calling for the protection and preservation of the rights of Nigerian citizens and also an investigation into the incident. No soon, the protests suddenly turned south, where protesters started getting attacked by thugs. Hoodlums seized the opportunity and started looting private and government properties, burning down police stations, as well as private and public businesses, and also killing security personnel. Although President Muhammadu Buhari had addressed the nation on the 22nd of October, his message did not seem to smoothen Nigerians, as nothing about the Lekki tollgate incident was mentioned. He had, however, directed the judicial panel of inquiry to be set up in states where cases of police brutality has been reported. Gender-based violence, an aspect of human rights violation, is a growing problem, especially domestic violence, sexual exploitation, early marriage, and rape of minors. In the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, the lockdown which the government had to impose resulted in an increase in the rate of gender-based violence. Torture of suspects to get confessional statements is also the order of the day. Security operatives show faces of criminal suspects being paraded who are presumed innocent until proven guilty. Trial by the media without fair hearing and unlawful detention has become the order of the day. Prisoners and detainees are reportedly subjected to extrajudicial execution, torture, gross overcrowding, food and water shortage, and inadequate medical treatment, which at times result in deaths. Although Nigeria has been active in signing and ratifying the international human rights treaties, the task successive government face is implementing these treaties domestically. This year's theme reinforces the need for Nigeria and other countries to implement policies already put in place to protect and preserve the rights of its citizens. Celestina Area, TVC News, Abuja.
All right, that's a collection of some of the background of some of the issues we'll be talking about right now. Now, when it comes to issues of human rights, people see it from different perspectives, but there are benchmarks that certainly goes out there as parameters for measurement. Joining me in the studio now to discuss this is Ayodele Adio, media consultant and executive. It's nice to have you join me right now.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. And we have Debo Adeniran joining us here as well, the executive chairman, Center for Anti-Corruption and Open Leadership. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Now, let me say happy World Human Rights Day.
That's right.
So the point there is, let's talk about it first, and then whether we stand as a country to celebrate or commemorate it based on what we have and what we see is totally a different thing.
Exactly.
All right, I'm going to start with you, Debo.
That's right.
If you assess Nigeria since the days of independence up until now, Nigeria has not necessarily fared well when it comes to human rights, especially after the First Republic. You know, when the military was here, and then, and then the Fourth Republic and all of that. How would you assess how are we moving? Are we stagnant now, or we are up, or we're going down? Or what's your assessment? Let me put it that way.
Well, thank you for asking that question. It's like you have a reserved answer. Look, I don't think Nigeria will have had it better, given the nature and personalities of those who govern us in Africa. When colonialists were going, they handed over the reign of governance in the hands of those they could trust. And those they could trust thought that they have the world under their feet, and that they are better human than the rest of us. So they think that, they rule us as if the rest of us who didn't have the opportunity of being in government.
The reference you're making now are to people we call the founding fathers. Are you saying they were not visionary enough, or they were not ready for?
I'm not talking about not being visionary. What the implementation of the instruments, the use of instruments of governing is what we are talking about. It didn't give adequate consideration for the observance of human rights, to the extent that we should have it. They catch on the fact that a preponderance of Nigerians, literates and semi-literates. Many of us are not even at those stages. They weren't even aware of the existence of the 1945 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So we didn't even know the content. We didn't even know that we have those rights. And they were cashing on that ignorance to, right usher on us. And eventually, when they kind of observe, some of these rights, we thank them profusely for according us our own rights. The fella sang the other time that, look, human rights now my property. You can't dash me my property and all that. So people begin to gain the consciousness that, look, they have some right. And of course, for so long, up to the early 80s, we didn't have what we call NGOs or civil society organizations. We had trade organizations, we have labor union, labor centers, and the rest of them. And they also have limited exposure into what constitutes human rights. Right. And that also limited how far they could go in the defense of human rights until middle 80s, when maybe some of those who learned, lawyers, they came together, they formed what you call CLO. 1989, we formed CDHR, that is Committee for Defense of Human Rights. And so human rights education became more widespread. And a number of people now started to demand for their rights. They know that God has endowed them with certain structures and features that they have to use. Of course, you have the right to see, you have the right to talk. Exactly. You have your legs to move. You have the right to hold opinions and propagate same. You have the right, to know, because you have brains and all of that.
All right. Let me bring Ayodele in here. Now, if I have to list some of the rights here, which a lot of them are found in most of the constitutions across the world. Now, the right to self-determination, the right to liberty, the right to due process of the law, the right to freedom of movement, the right to privacy, the right to freedom of thought, the right to freedom of religion, the right to freedom of expression, right to peaceful assembly, and right to freedom of association. Now, the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria recognizes all of these rights, just like many constitutions across the world. Yet, there is still the complaint from a lot of people, and especially when it comes to those who are watching how these rights, how they are violated or how they are respected, depending on where you see it. those who are marking the scores are saying that Nigeria is not doing well in some of these things. Talk to us about this.
Well, I mean, first of all, you have to understand that human rights are a product of democratic societies. And democracies run on the assumptions of an egalitarian society where all persons are deemed to be equal. So except all persons are deemed to be equal under the law, you can't be said to be running a democracy. And except all persons are equal, it will be difficult to confer those rights that you're talking about.
It's not like the animal farm situation.
But here you are in a country where these rights, like you said, are enshrined in our constitution, but are only observed with persons in certain classes of society. So the policeman who brutalizes the young boy on the streets treats the senator or the politician with respect and dignity. They treat people in certain social cadre with that same respect, and they treat people or proletariats with scorn and complete disregard, denying you that right to dignity. You talk about torture, like you rightly reason that people should not be tortured under the rights, that are conferred to people. But yet you have hundreds of people have been tortured and interrogated. If you have followed the hearings in Lagos State at the judicial panel, you see the abuses on persons. However, we saw that a big fry was arrested from Niger sometime last week and came in as if he was coming into the wedding of his daughter. Flew into the airport, not a single handcuff around him. It looked like the people escorting him, they were escorting a VIP into Nigeria. So you have a classist situation in Nigeria where rights of persons are only observed to people in certain cadres of the society. And of course, the Constitution is also complicit because, the Chapter 2 of the Constitution that confers you with all of these rights, across 12 between 13 and 24, talks about these glowing political, economic, developmental rights that you have. But all of those rights are non-justiciable by Section 6. So what does that mean? It means you cannot seek redress in court. If you're denied all of those rights.
You can't sue the government.
You can't sue anybody if you're denied all of those rights. So it's a problem. So the Constitution in itself is also complicit, right? So except we address these fundamental issues of accountability, we are not going to make any reasonable progress. And people will begin to hide under the vagueness of certain laws that we have, or under the vagueness of some of our constitution, to continue to trample on the rights and dignities of Nigerians.
All right. Now, Debo, there was a time we were debating the issue when we heard the president say that the national security supersedes rule of law. And it became a very strong... We had Nigerians who were very learned when it comes to some of these things. Some of them said, well, the president could be right depending on where he saw it. And others said, no, anywhere in the world, the rule of law is what ensures there is national security in the first place. So talk to us from that window. If we see a lot of things, because the government of the day, sometimes because they are privy to certain information no one has access to when it comes to what can jeopardize national security, what can ensure people's safety and welfare and all of that, that lead them to do certain things that are seen as violation of human rights.
Well, first and foremost, there is nothing that you do in government that should not be done according to the rule of law. And that is why that set of laws were put together. We call it Constitution and some other statute books that contains laws that guide the way our lives are being administered. So even when you talk about national security, we are talking about also rule of engagement. This rule of engagement had to be put together according to the law. And anybody that violates the law has some sanctions waiting for him somewhere. Now, it is a different thing entirely if we have a dictator or a tyrant in power who doesn't even want to recognize, the rule of law, who think I mean, who thinks that his own authority supersede the authority of the Constitution that he swore to uphold? If we are not operating under the military regime that has suspended the Constitution and they brought out the military laws under which they want to govern, so if they are not, even when we are being governed under the decrees are laws, a set of laws that have to guide the operation of governance. Now, when there might have been maybe a kind of misconception or misinterpretation of what the gentleman said, that maybe national security is superseded. It couldn't have been, because there are emergency laws that takes care of emergency situation. For example, during emergencies, during wars, you are likely to have what you call collateral damages. I mean, these are violations of regular rights of people, but you give it to it that in war, almost everything is fair. Okay, so that may be admissible. Then there are occasions when you needed to carry out certain, in fact, to kind of protect human rights, you need to also invite a number of people, to be questioned. Supposing maybe violent crime happens somewhere and you have to suspect certain people. Yes, it's a violation of their rights to freedom of movement or whatever during the period that you are interrogating them. Even if it is not arrest, you have taken their time, which you are not prepared to pay for. So it's a violation of their right, which these are some of the exceptions, okay, that you can always admit that, okay, there's no way a criminal can just be identified among people. But wherever a crime occurs, you still need to get a number of suspects to interrogate. For example, when the EndSARS thing happened, a number of course, the states, there's nowhere you have such massive outing that the state will not want to protect its own self. So the state will now come up that, look, if we continue to allow this thing to expand and keep expanding, what they consider to be national security is the protection of their own mail tickets. Okay? And they know that eventually what they fear most, revolution, may occur. And they wouldn't want to think of that, not to talk of allowing it to happen. That might be the reason why they just thought that it had to be truncated. And that will be done, by...
No, but it was, at that time, it was obvious when, especially when hoodlums, those were targets, hoodlums had taken over.
Yes, even before the hoodlums took over, even if the hoodlum didn't take over at all, no government will want to continue to tolerate, that kind of mass movement of human beings, on the way. Of course, while they do their protest, they also violate the rights of those who want to enjoy their right to freedom of movement. Okay? And of course, freedom of economic activities and all that. All right. So basically, government will come in with a view to protect those, to protecting those who don't want to participate in the protest, so that those who are enjoying their right will want to do their protest. Then they will also want to protect their own constituency, so that other people, especially the military, will not cash in on that. So
one party
it's a kind of catch-22 thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Ayodele, now we at different times we have seen or we've heard the Amnesty International, Transparency International, Human Rights Watch, sending messages, especially when they come up with some of their yearly annual release as to what is going on. And we also see the response by government, especially the government of Nigeria, many times debunking, rejecting the reports by some of these international agencies. What do you think is at the core of the inability of those international organizations and the government of Nigeria to agree to say, okay, in this area, we agree this and this and this has happened based on the evidence, so let us see how we can work on this or work on that. That's what anybody would expect.
I mean, it's a case of not wanting to take responsibility on the part of the government. And of course, like we say, in Africa, the bad child is the mother's own. So each time there's a bad report, you're likely to have the government deny and completely disregard it. And once you do that, it's a complete vicious cycle. It means it's going to happen again and again and again because you fail to take absolute responsibility for that. So what I would like to see is a situation where governments are a lot more open to some of these papers, to some of these publications yearly that point to human rights infractions across the country, with a view to identifying and resolving those issues over time. Because if you don't do that, you enable the people who perpetrate these dastardly acts of violating rights and embolden them to continue to trample on the rights of individuals. And again, you also risk, because at the end of the day, you talk about protecting national security, you also risk a national security crisis, because the more you trample on the rights and dignities of human beings and persons, people are naturally prone, it's human nature, to also want to seek to assert those rights because they are fundamental and they are inherent and they are inalienable. They are going to want to enforce those fundamental rights, and that's when you have acts of violence and chaos. Remember that the Tunisian uprising started because a poor man wanted to assert his rights, his economic rights, to sell a small trade in his wheelbarrow. And that was what led to the series of protests. So for you to also protect that national security part, you also need to respect the rights and dignities of people, so people do not resort to personal help to assert those rights against the state, as we have seen. And it's interesting to note that most of the papers that have been written, both locally and internationally, that has pointed to the reason of the rise of terrorism and banditry in certain parts of the country has been pointed to acts of the state oppressing citizens in various parts of the country. They are pointed to brutal acts from the police and from states suppressing the rights of citizens and have led to terrorism and banditry in certain parts of the country. The agitations in the Niger Delta was a factor of denying people economic rights. Their environment was in tatters, and all of that. So the more you trample on the rights and dignities of people, you put yourself in a position where citizens will find a way to reassert those rights. And it never happens over a table. It happens on the field.
Sometimes on the streets, especially when Nigerians and citizens are getting more aware of some of their rights and how to express them. Now, we are rounding off gradually, but the point there is, if we have to, that ideal that every Nigerian is looking forward to, that's benchmark where Nigerians are saying we want to be able to have these rights because it is ours in the first place, like Fela would put it.
Yes, right.
If we have to take the steps towards getting there now, how challenging would it be, and what should the government do? Because when it comes to the issues of human rights, it seems the government has the knife and the yam.
Well, you see, it is because the people allow them to hold both the knife and the yam at the same time, because the people owns the yam. The government has a knife. Yeah. So they should, if they don't leave the yam for them, they are not going to cut it in the way that they like it. And the only way out of it is that we have to develop a national ideology, whereby everybody, he talked about society that assumes that everybody is supposed to be equal under the law, and that there should be checks and balances, not only within arms of government, even between the people and the government. So the way to do it is to maybe allow a sovereign national conference, because that is where our true sovereignty lies.
Haven't we had enough national conferences?
No, I tell you, sovereign is the operational world. All the conferences we have been having, in fact, I have been part of many of them. They are not sovereign to the extent that they are.
What will make it sovereign?
Now, let me.
Because the issue there is,
I just mentioned it in passing because it's a long, drawn discussion.
Exactly.
But we have actually given a template that, look, sovereign national conference is not a new invention. What you could do, what a state, a government could do is to ask individuals, to determine what kind of, there are certain items, yes, that you have to leave, that will have been listed for governance. Then individuals will make up their mind on what to do. They go back to their family, father, mother, and children, then to their immediate community, local government, state, and all that. Then it's culminates in national government, because representative from each level of this discussion.
Is that different from the National Assembly we have now?
It's different.
Okay.
That didn't start from individual to family. The individual will represent himself within his own family. The family will determine whether it's mother, whether it's father, whether it's the children that will represent them. Then they go into their community.
One would say, one would say in the 21st century, I wonder how we're going to have that kind of the strata of representation here.
It is possible. Okay. It's only in our consciousness that has been warped by the authoritarianism.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to ensure that this topic you've raised now will become a topic of discussion.
So what I'm saying is that it's at that level that we can determine the parameters under which human rights will be observed.
Okay.
It's not going to be as dictated by the state.
Right.
It's going to be guided by the law, and anybody that violates the law will be held responsible for it.
We have to round off. We have to round off here now. But certainly, what you have raised now, we will ensure that I and my producers will put that together, and then we'll bring you back in here for us to discuss that, because that's another area. Thank you so much,
it's my pleasure,
for coming on.
It's my pleasure.
And managing editor, Avalon Daily Adio. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right.